Case 8. Why did Thomas believe? The question before the court is this: why did Thomas believe? Was his faith produced by an irresistible inner determination prior to his encounter with Christ, or does John present his belief as the direct response to Christ's self-revelation? Thomas himself identifies the condition of his unbelief. "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." John 20:25. Thomas does not request an argument, a proof, or an abstract explanation. He asks for the risen Christ himself. The condition he names is to encounter the crucified and risen Lord. Christ answers that request directly. "Put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve but believe." John 20:27. Christ does not merely supply information. He reveals himself, and his revelation is joined to a command: believe. Revelation and summons belong together. Thomas responds, "My Lord and my God." John 20:28. Christ then identifies the immediate basis of Thomas's faith. "Because you have seen me, you have believed." The sequence is plain. Thomas doubted. Christ revealed himself. Thomas encountered the risen Lord. Thomas believed. John introduces no additional unseen determination as the explanation of Thomas's faith. The explanation Christ himself gives is that Thomas saw him and believed. This does not imply that Thomas believed apart from grace. Christ is the one who comes, who reveals, and who calls. The initiative is entirely his. But John does not describe Thomas's faith as the unavoidable result of an antecedent inner act preceding his encounter with Christ. Thomas is portrayed as a real human being, confronted by Christ's self-revelation and responding to him in faith. Christ immediately extends the principle beyond Thomas. "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." John 20:29. Thomas believed through seeing. Future believers will believe without seeing. How? Through the apostolic witness. John states the purpose of his gospel: "These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." John 20:31. The mode of revelation changes. The purpose does not. Thomas encounters Christ directly. Future believers encounter him through the apostolic testimony. John makes this pattern explicit. "That which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands, we proclaim also to you." 1 John 1:1-3. The apostolic witness is more than historical reporting. It is the divinely appointed testimony through which the risen Christ is proclaimed and made known to those who hear. Paul describes the same pattern. Faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. Romans 10:17. God reveals. Christ is proclaimed. The person encounters that revelation. Faith responds. This does not establish that human beings believe independently of grace. It shows grace at work in Christ revealing himself and calling Thomas to faith. But John 20 does not state that Thomas's belief was caused by an irresistible inner act preceding his encounter with Christ. That claim must be imported from a larger theological system. It is not the explanation John gives. The same distinction applies to unbelief. Christ commands Thomas, "Do not disbelieve but believe." John 20:27. The command presents Thomas as genuinely confronted with Christ and summoned to believe. John does not portray revelation as an impersonal force that produces belief automatically. He portrays Christ revealing himself and calling the person to believe. Thomas believes. Others may resist. John does not explain the difference by appealing to two different divine purposes in revelation. Instead, he presents Christ's revelation as ordered toward faith and life. "These are written so that you may believe, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Thomas provides the visible example. He does not generate the revelation. He does not discover Christ by autonomous reasoning. He does not raise Christ from the dead. Christ comes to him. Christ reveals himself. Christ calls him to believe. Thomas believes. The initiative is Christ's. The response is Thomas's. John 20 gives no reason to replace this narrative with an unseen mechanism as the necessary explanation of Thomas's faith. The text itself gives the explanation Christ provides. "Because you have seen me, you have believed." The evidence before the court therefore establishes that Christ reveals himself. Christ calls people to faith. His revelation is graciously given so that he may be known and believed, and those confronted by that revelation are presented as genuinely responding in faith or in unbelief. Thomas believed because Christ made himself known to him. This is not a denial of grace. It is grace in the form of revelation and summons. But it does challenge the claim that John 20 requires us to explain Thomas's faith by an antecedent, irresistible determination. John gives us something simpler, clearer, and more immediate. Christ reveals himself, and Thomas believes. And the explanation remains the one Christ himself gives. Because you have seen me, you have believed.